The Supreme Court has ruled a woman is defined by their biological sex. The court sided with campaign group For Women Scotland, which brought a case against the Scottish government arguing that sex-based protections should only apply to people that are born female. Judge Lord Hodge said the ruling should not be seen as a triumph of one side over the other and stressed that the law still gives protection against discrimination to transgender people. The Scottish government argued in court that transgender people with a Gender Recognition Certificate, GRC for short, are entitled to the same sex-based protections as biological women. The Supreme Court was asked to decide on the proper interpretation of the 2010 Equality Act, which applies across Britain. Lord Hodge said the central question was how the words woman and sex are defined in the legislation. He told the court the unanimous decision of this court is that the terms woman and sex in the Equality Act 2010 refer to a biological woman and biological sex. Now, this puts the entirety of trans people's lives into uncertainty. Now, even though the court ruling says that this isn't about being biased and that trans people will be protected, in reality, it won't. This leaves trans people far more exposed to discrimination. Now, we also have some insight into why we have this outcome. Trans women were excluded from the hearings. The court has been criticised after it refused to allow trans women to take part in the hearings, although it did allow the civil rights group Amnesty UK to participate on the Scottish government side. Victoria MacLeod, a retired judge who changed her legal sex more than 20 years ago, was refused permission to be heard in the case. She said that meant the only effective group was excluded. She said the FWS case had failed at all previous stages. If the legal sex of trans people is reversed without our consent, then we will lose equal pay rights with men, to cite one example, and we will be two sexes at once, which is nonsense, she said. Now, that paragraph there tells me that this was clearly biased, but given the court ruling was based on the Equalities Act, this means it should be updated to clarify and strengthen rights for trans people so that any future court rulings would protect them. Now, Labour can stand up and strengthen trans people's rights. The problem is whether this Labour government will, and I think that Wes Streeting, the Health Secretary, is unambiguously transphobic. Kevin, what do you make of this court ruling, and where does that leave trans people in Britain today?
I'm disgusted. I don't think I've ever been less proud of the place I'm from, given the aforementioned, genocide participation and things like that. On top of that, now we're basically saying there are bits of populations that we can just hive off now to have no rights. It's disgusting. It really is. Just a quick message to all trans people listening to this: if you're a trans woman, you're a woman. If you're a trans man, you're a man. If you're non-binary, you're non-binary, and you're all entirely valid. No court can ever take that away from you. I want you to remember that in all of this. You know who you are, and you are who you are. This court case was obviously biased. As you mentioned, not a single trans person was allowed to speak before it, even though several tried to. So the only affected group was the group that was excluded. It's taking us back to not even Victorian era justice at this point, but Roman era justice, where the accused isn't allowed to testify on their own behalf. It's genuinely embarrassing. This group of ossified, crusty, law lord freaks need to be done away with. The Supreme Court has shown itself to be nothing but a biased, conservative, retrograde force in British life and needs to be destroyed. The one ray of hope that I think we have is that this will almost certainly be appealed to the European Court of Human Rights, and I think it's almost certain to be overturned there because this flatly contradicts previous rulings that have been given. One of the cases they literally cited in their decision is a case that will ultimately be used against them and will bring this court case down in Europe, I think, is that of Godwin versus the UK, where the European Court of Human Rights basically upheld that you can't hold people in a kind of gender-based limbo. You can't have them between a rock and a hard place between two gender-defined positions, okay? You can't have groups of people that essentially are in a legal grey area. That's not allowed. You have to have a final decision on this, which will force the UK government to then have to rewrite the law. And like you say, given that Wes Streeting will very possibly be the leader of the Labour Party by the time that happens, because Keir Starmer's not going to be around for very much longer, I don't. That doesn't bode well for the future in that sense. But it will be overturned, I think, at the European Court of Human Rights. Um, the No, and I was just going to say, the fact that this is being done in the way that it's being done is so ridiculous because it's being used. The argument of common sense is being used that it's about definitions of biological sex. Okay, well, define that then, because you can't. You know you can't. That's a lie in of itself. It's a lie built upon a lie. Because every time anyone tries to define that as a concept, they will exclude people who should be included, and they will include people who should be excluded. It's absolutely ludicrous. This is not the basis for a sound legal judgment. This is conservative culture war wank.
I have to stress to people that there's this pervasive idea that's been pushed by the media, pushed by the likes of J.K. Rowling, that, oh, we're progressive people, we're concerned about women, but we think that the existence of trans people is actually misogyny, it's actually men trying to invite themselves into women's spaces, and actually we are the biggest defenders of women's rights. And when you break it down every single time, transphobia is just another conservative movement. You often find transphobes with also very conservative beliefs when it comes to gay, bi, lesbians. So it's not that, oh, we're really progressive, but just this one thing we don't get. You can see it all of the time. You can see many people who, I mean, what's her name? Posey Parker, the one who stands with Nazis, the one who's also then said stuff about, oh, none of us support abortion. Well, how's that for your women's rights? And I've always tried to stress to people, maybe I'm not the best person to say this, or I explain it the best, but when you attack trans people, and specifically trans women, it always falls on cis women too. It is in the interest of cis women to stand with trans people.
Well, we all know that the TERF movement in the UK has been funded by AstroTurf
Yeah.
money from the United States, from dark, far-right money, Christian authoritarian groups, right? We know that the TERF movement are very fond of Donald Trump, a man who is a multiple rapist who has cheated on all of his wives and has celebrated his role in the removal of people's medical rights in the United States, that being the right to reproductive health care. These people don't care for women in the slightest. If they did, they wouldn't support any of these things. And yet they do. They're just transphobic. They're just transphobic hate mongers and nothing more than that.
When I initially saw the headline, I thought, okay, maybe this is a case that the court is taking the Equalities Act literally, in terms of they technically interpret it correctly, but it just meant that the Equalities Act wasn't updated or it wasn't trans inclusive, because it does say, it references sex and women. And I think that my knee-jerk reaction was essentially, right, okay, this is the court ruling. The problem isn't necessarily with the court, the problem is with the Equalities Act, but it clearly doesn't shrine trans people into law in terms of their protections, right? That was my initial thing. And then I thought, well, okay, it's simple then. Update the Equalities Act. And then I thought, it's the Labour government, I don't think they're going to do that. But then I read into it, as I pointed out earlier, and as you pointed out, when they barred trans people from any hearings,
yeah,
there is no way, because I was willing to give the benefit of the doubt first, there is no way you can say this isn't biased when the entire thing, the entire group they are talking about and ruling on, trans people, are being excluded from it. Then this is anything but biased, and it is disgusting.
It's not. This isn't justice. This isn't justice in any real respect whatsoever. Trans people have been excluded from it. It's being done on the basis of quote unquote common sense about biological sex at birth, which is a presumption of administration rather than anything to do with biology. So there's that. There's the fact that it's the entire framing of this is around TERF nonsense from start to finish, all of it. I agree that the Gender Recognition Act needs to be changed and updated because clearly this isn't working. It's just that the people in Parliament now, I don't trust them to tie their own shoelaces, let alone actually do legislation. And I just want to sort of point out to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court what a liar he is, because in a very technical sense, this decision doesn't change the law, in that it doesn't change a single word that appears in legislation. Because that's not the role of the Supreme Court. It's not a part of the legislature. It doesn't literally make laws in that respect.
It's interpretation of the current law.
Exactly. Law is not about what you write on a piece of paper. It's how you implement it. We know, for instance, that the Hunting with Dogs Act bans the live hunting of foxes with dogs on horseback, right? And yet we know it happens every weekend throughout the winter and autumn months, and indeed the summer months. Um, and yet the police do nothing about it because the law is only so good as it's implemented. If the police don't do anything about it, if the courts don't do anything about it, it's meaningless. And this is exactly the point I make. He hasn't changed a single sentence, a single word, a single full stop or comma in any of the laws. And yet he has revolutionized the way in which this law will be applied. Essentially, trans women, and indeed women, cis women who don't have the correct documentation on them at the time that they are challenged, have had their rights removed from them and can be removed from single sex spaces.
And this is the problem I have when they say, "Oh well, no, don't worry. This isn't biased in one group or the other. Trans people are still protected in the law." And you have to understand that yes, you're right. The Supreme Court doesn't write new laws, but the interpretation of the law and the communication to the masses fundamentally changes the narrative behind it and it emboldens bigots.
Yeah.
Now you're going to have people saying, "Well, actually, I'm gonna like it's gonna breed, I think, civilian policing on trans people."
Yeah.
I saw someone go into the bathroom and I think they might be trans. And now they think they actually might have a legal case for it. And they're going to start causing harassment, calling up the police. Like it emboldens these people.
Yeah. There are going to be a slew of cases of harassment and physical assault against, like I say, not just trans women, of course, although it would be bad regardless of their gender, gender situation. There are going to be lots of cis women who don't necessarily apply to the exact femininity rules that have been set in somebody else's head, and they will be physically accosted and challenged. You're going to have, I think, essentially examples of far right vigilantism being aimed at people who are gender non-conforming, who just want to go and use the toilet or some other gender single sex space or whatever. This is a recipe for disaster. And it's being sold to us under the guise of this straightening things out. This is going to be a situation which clears up all of the grey areas. No, what you have done is taken a relatively black and white issue and made it virtually all grey now, because every single woman has the potential to not look feminine enough in the mind of somebody else. And so, unless you have the exact documentation necessary to prove that you are a cis woman to this person's liking, they can potentially physically try and remove you from a space. You're going to have, I mean, I don't even know what to call it, pussy policing outside of toilets. Like, it's an insane position that you have left us in. It's obviously conservative nonsense, and thankfully it will be struck down in Europe, I'm pretty sure.
When I say to people, if you're having a conversation with, I mean, the term turf is kind of bullshit because it's got feminist in it. Let's just say it's just a conservative belief, right?
Yeah.
It's just a bigoted conservative belief. It's not even a turf belief, right? But if you're having discussions with transphobes, they're very good at sort of like identifying a false problem, which is that men in women's bathrooms, blah 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 blah. What they don't know how to answer is, what are you going to do about it though? What's your solution to it all? And that's where the point you made was about genital policing. Like, is that what you're going to do? So you keep moaning about trans people. We get it, right? You feel uncomfortable about trans people. It's not like we haven't heard this for the last at least 10 years, right? We get it. So what's your solution? And they don't have any, because they know that actually their transphobia is completely illogical, because it puts a target on all women's back, because now you're going to have people going to be more heightened to the idea of the idea that, oh, maybe they are trans. How are you going to check? Are you going to check their genitals? Are you going to have police on the entrance of toilets checking your genitals before you go into the correct bathroom? All these things actually makes it more complicated. So these people saying, oh, this clarifies it. It doesn't clarify it. It just means that it made some people feel a little bit better, because they can simply only understand that gender and sex are the same thing. And it's simply not the case that gender and sex are the same thing. They are different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a ridiculous situation that we've now been put in, because of course these people will try and stir up and gin up fear about trans people invading these spaces that makes people unsafe. It doesn't make people unsafe. Straight cis white men make people unsafe, largely in Britain, because that's the majority of the people who do these crimes. That's just a fact, okay? And you can't stop either trans people or indeed cis men from necessarily entering a toilet, because you can't have a policeman at the entrance of every toilet, okay? Safety doesn't come from trying to exclude trans people from this. That's not how safety arrives at all. We've literally had the absurd situation. You mentioned Posey Parker, her famous clip of her saying that in America, where people are allowed to have guns, because obviously, that men with guns should be going into women's toilets to make them feel safe. I can't think of a more ridiculous recipe for violence against women than something like that.
And the irony saying we don't want men in women's toilets, but also we want men in women's toilets with guns.
Yeah. And
Idiotic.
it's so demeaning actually to all women that they're being boiled down to their genitals in essence.
Yeah.
Which of course excludes intersex people and all manner of other things. But also the legal definition of now legally defined for the first time ever in British law what a lesbian is. I don't know about you, but if I were a lesbian, I wouldn't want some disgusting high court judge telling me what I am or am
Yeah.
not.
True.
This is an absurd, disgusting piece of reactionary nonsense. This is not a legal ruling. This is a joke. This is a farce.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.